people say, well, we need the most important thing. Let's start with the most important thing. So we need to know what everything is so we can judge what's going to be more important than something else. And I would say that's not really necessary. We just need to start on something, because it's in the doing that we will discover what we need to do.
Positive work culture is often an afterthought and treated as an optional addition for many companies in the pursuit of productivity. Mob programming challenges this notion by fully leaning into a collaborative work where the sole priority is to create a healthy environment where employees can effortlessly work together. Mob programming is often cited as the next step of pair programming. It's a whole team approach where everyone is working the same thing at the same time. The result? A productivity machine where workers are not only happier, but outputting above standard conventions. Here with me is the lead pioneer of mob programming, Woddy Zuill. He has nearly 40 years of programming experience, a senior tech consultant where he has advised hundreds of companies, and one of the nicest people I've had the pleasure of speaking with. What is mob programming and who is it for?
Well, the idea of mob programming is simply, if we need to collaborate, then let's be as effective as possible with our collaboration. And for us, when we first started trying to do that, it turned out that if we all sit together at the same time in front of the same computer screen, work on the same thing, then we are really collaborating. So that's the basic idea. It's for anybody who's creating software. It may not work for everybody, but it's certainly, something that could work for anybody.
Right. So just to clarify, so essentially, because I was looking at videos and I did some myself, it's essentially you have one person on the keyboard on the computer itself, and then you have the navigators, which is like, it could be a group of 5, 7, usually around
Right.
5, and they kind of navigate the person on the keyboard and they swap every 15, 30 minutes. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, well, yeah. So there are no rules as such. The way that we worked was based on something I learned about pair programming, and I learned this from Llewellyn Falco. I was doing some pair programming with him, and we worked in a way that I was sort of familiar with, but we were very strict about it. And the way that we did it was that for an idea to go from someone's mind into the computer, it has to go through someone else's hands.
Right.
So that's as close to a rule as I have when I'm working with a team doing mob programming, or what I'm now calling software teaming. The concept with that is that if somebody's sitting at the keyboard, they're focused on typing, getting whatever it is into the computer, whatever we're doing. And the other person keeps staying in the solution space and the problem space and thinking about a level slightly up above the code. So if it's mob programming, there'll be 4 or 5 or whatever number of us all thinking about what are we doing? And we're usually working with a whiteboard, communicating, getting our ideas down, turning them into something that's relatively straightforward. And we write code one line at a time. So we're gonna come up with the idea, the big idea, and then break it down into the small bits that we're going to do. We need to connect to the database. We need to make this query and get a call. We need to get that data back. We need to use it in this way. Right. So we're going to do those steps. So it's 5 or 6 people guiding the process of the person at the keyboard. But we can't just have everybody yelling out, here's what to do next. So we do it in a controlled manner, where one person acts as the main navigator, perhaps. But as far as the rotation, you kind of implied that the idea is that the person at the keyboard doesn't stay at the keyboard all day long. We usually, the way we would work, we usually have that person switch out maybe every 5 to 10 minutes. At first, we were doing 3 or 4 minutes. Then we increased it up to about 15 minutes and then brought it back down so that we're mostly close to about 7 minutes, around there. But again, there's no rule to this. That's the way we worked. And when we were sitting together at the same computer, that was pretty easy to do. If you want to picture it, we've got either some projectors or large monitors that everyone can see, usually 1 or 2 or 3 monitors, a table where our keyboards are, and then we all sit in chairs sort of in an array behind it with the The person who's sitting at the keyboard is up at the table. When we work remotely, we pretty much do the same thing. But we're all looking at our own screens, so we have to have some way to share our screens, and there's different ways of doing this, and to share the access to the code, to the development environment, and how we're going to do that.
Yeah, that's honestly when I did mob program, I instantly fell in love. To be honest, it's interesting because I actually had a bad experience with it because the person I was doing with it, I didn't like the person, but I just loved the thing we were doing, which is mob programming so much. I just love the concept. And it seems like honestly, when I talk to developers, and I actually got to try it out with one person who was also skeptical. It seems like once people actually give it a fair shot, it seems like they really end up liking it. And I find that very interesting because with Agile, I wasn't really aware of this, but it seems like there's a lot of people who are kind of iffy about Agile. And I actually wanted to talk to you about that. Why do you feel some developers are so weird about Agile, even though, because I asked like, is mob programming, last time we spoke, came from Agile?
Yeah, so the basic idea of mob programming is just a few steps, baby steps beyond pair programming,
Yeah.
which pretty much comes from extreme programming. And Agile grew out of the ideas of extreme programming and a few other things. So that's the way it is. So first of all, Agile has grown to mean many different things to many different people. So it's kind of like you say, why are some people iffy about marriage? Well,
Right.
okay, it's like, there's a whole lot of different ways to think about it. Before you get married to somebody, you have an idea. The one person has an idea of what marriage should be. The other person has an idea of what marriage should be. And they're
Right.
based on each of those individuals' viewpoint on life and how they grew up and how they've seen other people. There could be a lot of misunderstanding just getting to the point where they decide to get married, so they're not thinking it's the same thing. It's the same with what I think with Agile is that there's many different people with their own takes on Agile, and I have my own take on Agile, right? There's the people who wrote the Agile Manifesto, whoever, those 17 people, whatever they were thinking, what they were attempting to do is they were all exploring what at that time was called lightweight processes. And with lightweight processes, this was a counter to the heavyweight processes that were in place in the 90s in trying to manage software development. And a lot of that goes back to what people call the waterfall, where we would not learn very quickly about what we got wrong, and we would often get much of it wrong. So the lightweight processes were ways that people were trying to find where we could more quickly get to some kind of result that we could learn from, and we could steer to the correct results rather than think we already know where we're headed. So Agile was introduced in that time. So 17 people got together to try and decide what was common about their different ways of thinking. And that's how I understand it. And they put that stuff into the Agile Manifesto. So to me, what Agile is just a reflection of what the Agile Manifesto is. And it's been changed, morphed, extended, reduced, whatever, by everybody who's got their own idea of what Agile should be.
Right.
So there's no one Agile anymore. It's all kinds of different ways people look at it.
So it's more of a reflection. If someone has a bad experience with Agile, it's more of a reflection of their management or the company culture than it is.
Sure, or what books they read or what places they've worked. And, I was exposed to Agile through reading at first, but I was exposed to extreme programming by reading as well. But I'd worked at a place in 1999 where they were doing their own version of lightweight processes that were very close to what extreme programming was. And as soon as I saw it, I'm going to be, really adamant about this. As soon as I saw how they were working, I said, I really like this. We worked closely together, everybody. The business people, one of the Agile principles is, the business people and the programmers or developers work together daily. That we communicate with our customer. It's more about collaborating with the customer than it is about documents and a contract with the customer. So all of this together, I saw these things in this place I worked, and I thought I really liked this. But it was a short-term contract, 3 months. They had a contract with another company for 3 months worth of work. And it wasn't how much work are they going to get done. It was, let's get as much as we can done within the 3 months. And so I was with them for 3 months, and I got to see they weren't doing extreme programming, although I sometimes say it that way. They were doing their own version of that they had come to in their own way. So a lot of people at that time were trying to find better ways to do software development, as we always have been trying to do. And so that's that. Yeah, it's going to depend on how you came to it. A lot of what I see in Agile, as it's implemented in companies, doesn't seem any better of a way of working than anything else people were doing in the 90s. So there's a good chance that it's not that it's been misunderstood as much as it's been understood in different ways by different people.
That's so interesting. And thank you for saying that, for clarifying all of that, because I really just the reason I'm asking these questions, because people have so many critiques, because I think this is such a great idea about mob programming, but it seems like people have like this weird understanding of it. And I just wanted to focus on the benefits. Now that we address some of the criticisms, it's last time we spoke off air, you're saying the two things that really stuck out to me, and they're two different, which is inventory, which I never thought about that. And the biggest one for me was also culture, how much it made people happy. So can you speak on those two things a little bit more?
So the first thing, we'll talk about inventory. So inventory, as I use the term, means any work of any sort that we've done on something that isn't now in the hands of a user, and they're getting the benefit of the purpose they wanted the software. So let's just say I'm adding some software to an application, and this is so that they can make a handful of little reports that they need to do about some of the data that they're collecting. So as soon as somebody says we need a way to make reports about this stuff, then we've introduced inventory in a way, because we're thinking about it. That's a kind of work, And so then we say, okay, well, what do we want to have in that reporting system? Well, we need to do at least these 5 different reports, and here's the descriptions and examples of those reports. Great. What else do we need to know about it? Well, here's the different items that we're going to filter on to get those reports, and here's the way we want to lay out those reports, how they're going to look when we work on them, when we actually run them. So that's all work that we're doing in defining the end thing we want. So the minute we've introduced it and said, we need a reporting system, we now have some inventory, because the end user isn't yet using that software. The moment we've got that all completed, and it's working more or less the way we hope it will, and we get it into the hands of the user, where they're actually using it, that's the way I view it, we now have moved it past being inventory. It is now off the shelves. So think about it like in a factory where they're making, I've worked in a flat factory where they were making, just an example, musical instruments when I was quite young. And so when let's say somebody orders a banjo is a musical instrument, even though some people might claim it's not really musical, but it's a musical instrument that it's got a kind of a drum head and a what they call a neck, and the neck has frets on it and strings, and you pluck the thing. So it's kind of like a guitar, but louder and more annoying. But anyways, so the banjo is inventory until we've shipped it to a user who's bought it and they're playing it. Now, really, it's not that they're playing it in that case, because they could just hang it on the wall. But it's no longer, it's inventory from the moment we buy the wood. The other parts that are going to turn into that, the paint or lacquer or varnish or whatever we're going to use to finish it, all the different bits are all inventory till they're assembled together. Then proven that it works properly, it's all set up, put into a case, put into a box, and shipped to the customer. So this is inventory. We can see it in a factory where you see the cars coming down the factory line, and all those things, everything you see there as far as parts and the vehicles that are being assembled, that's all inventory. So that's just a simple description. And inventory, to me, is anything we are holding that we haven't yet received our value, which is the money or whatever it's going to be, from delivering it to a user. So in software, it's really hard to see this compared to on a factory floor, where I can see piles of wood over there, piles of metal stuff over there, boxes of these parts, boxes of those parts. That's inventory. So we don't pay much attention to that in software development, whereas on a factory floor, I got invited in to help a company not too long ago with their processes. And as soon as I walked in, I could see everything in the area where they were building the things. People were having to walk around the boxes, and people were constantly moving boxes. And I could see they've got an inventory problem, because all of that inventory is getting in their way of being able to do their work well. So that inventory problems go way beyond just that. There's all kinds of quality issues because of it. There's all kinds of queuing problems. They're really closely related, queuing and inventory. So that's what inventory is. And so in my opinion, if we've thought about the reporting system and we worked on it for 6 months, we have 6 months worth of inventory that's not delivering value to anybody till we deliver that value. Agile, the concept of Agile was, let's deliver software to the end user really frequently. In those days, a couple weeks was considered really frequently. But nowadays it's, an hour is maybe not frequent for some organizations.
Yeah.
So we want to shorten, they call this the cycle time. The amount of time from when we've started working on something till it's delivered into use is our cycle time. And we want to shorten that as much as possible. Was that sort of what you wanted to cover with that?
Yeah, exactly. And that was a really great definition, because I think that an explanation was definitely warranted. And why? So because last time we talked, you gave a great explanation. So what exactly does mob programming? How does it make it so the inventory gets to user faster? Why is mob programming so good at that?
So there are several reasons that inventory exists. So if you could see, if somebody said, we want this application, it's going to have, it doesn't matter what it is. One that I worked on once was a doctor-patient interaction that ends up collecting all the data, all the information that gets generated doing that, and then orders labs, orders medications, all the work that the doctor does gets put through this thing. So the minute somebody says, we want an application to do that, and it's got to have these different parts, like a reporting system would be one example, a way for a doctor to input stuff, a way for nurses and other assistants to input stuff, and ways for us to view stuff on screens for doing all that. That's a lot of stuff. So we start defining it. So right there, we start creating inventory. What the issue that's going to occur is we're going to gather a lot of inventory before we've even determined that these things are actually needed or useful. So that in other words, software development is a process of discovery. And often people think, I already know everything we need to have. We just need to have somebody make that thing. Well, I believe that's probably not as true as we like to think it is. We will discover what customers want once customers or users want, once they're using the thing. And we won't get that information for a long time if we have to build that everything out that was originally described before it can even be delivered. So when we deliver it is when we start the real discovery process. So that inventory comes from these many different things. That's what kind of causes it. The way that mob programming addresses this is also combined with other ways of working. The first idea is, if I have some concept that I want to create code on, let's not figure out everything that we're going to need. Let's just figure out something that's sort of important to us. And I often, people say, well, we need the most important thing. Let's start with the most important thing. So we need to know what everything is so we can judge what's going to be more important than something else. And I would say that's not really necessary. We just need to start on something, because it's in the doing that we will discover what we need to do. That's one of my most quoted quotes that I've sort of come up with this. It's in the doing of the work that we discover the work that we must do. So the cause of this and how mob programming deals with it is we can take a project the moment that somebody says we'd like to have this as part of our application or whatever, and we can start trying to, instead of writing that big document, we just chip some small part of that off and start working on that. And then that will get delivered to the end user. Now, that's not unique to mob programming. There are many other ways of working where they attempt to keep the amount of work in progress to the least amount possible. They call this limiting your WIP. WIP is work in process or work in progress. So by limiting WIP, and that's a lean term. It comes from what we've grown to call lean, like in lean manufacturing and lean software development or lean product development. As we reduce the amount of inventory we have, now, but it really works kind of the opposite for me. If we reduce the amount of work in progress, we are automatically reducing the amount of inventory. So we could go into much deeper detail on this. It's probably better to keep it at a high level.
Yeah.
The concept, though, is that if we only have one thing to work on at a time, then the whole group of us can work on it together. The point of mob programming for us was simply, we knew collaboration was working well for us. We knew that it was necessary to collaborate with others. How do we turn up the good on collaboration? Right. So an example of typical collaboration might be, we'll get together in a meeting to discuss something, and then we'll split off to go do our work on it, and we'll send emails or messages or phone calls or walk over to someone's desk to talk about it as we go. So the emails, the meeting, the emails, the phone calls, messaging, those are all forms of collaboration, using very heavily depending on these channels of collaboration or communication. So the end result here is that we are collaborating already. How can we enhance the collaboration? And for us, it became, first of all, pair programming, and then closer, more and more one-on-one collaboration, sometimes with 2 or 3 of us. And in a sense, we turned pair programming into include everybody. At first, it was just software developers. So how does this deal with inventory? First of all, we're limiting the amount of work in progress. So that means anything we thought we wanted, we worked on the least amount possible to get it to the point where we could start writing code for it. So that's the point where we put our focus on it. Say, here's what we want it to do. And that implies we need to either have a real user or a proxy user who's really knowledgeable about the real use of this thing, working closely with us, not writing a document for us and sending us a document, and not having some meetings with us. But at first it was just us developers. And what we noticed was this: any item that we had a question on, and it was someone else on the team that we needed to ask that question, it got answered instantly. And even sometimes we didn't need to ask the question because the person was sitting right there with us. They saw the issue that was coming up, and they would bring it up before we would even pose a question. They say, oh, we're going to need a new table in the database for that. And here's how we go about doing that, because maybe they're the database expert. What would often happen prior to that is we're working on something. We go, well, we need a place to store this. So we hard code it in the code and make a note to ourselves that we're going to need to talk with the database people or maybe the people who are in charge of the overall application about where to store this and how it's going to get stored, how we're going to retrieve it. So we make notes to ourselves, and we're now putting those thoughts, and that work is now inventory, and it's going to be in a queue. And this is all about queuing or waiting. The queue is where we have something that we need to get answered or corrected or resolved for us, or where it's some dependency we're waiting on, and we can't get it instantly. So we're in a queue. And you can see this on an assembly line. If we're going to put the windows on a car door, then we have to have some of those windows somewhere. And those windows are waiting in a queue to be used. Once we're ready to put the window into the car door, then it's getting used. It's still inventory, but now it's no longer in that queue. It's in the queue of the doors have to get put on the car. And the car has to finally get made and delivered to the customer. So this is just the queuing and the inventory are the big wastes. I think the queuing is the biggest waste in product development. In my opinion, it's the queues I'm always looking for. If
Right.
people are waiting a lot for things, then I know we've got a problem. So there's the basic thing is what mob programming did for us initially was any question we had for someone that was on the team. And this is what became, we were no longer queuing. We no longer need to worry about that. But this is where we started discovering that the team needs to be more than just the developers. The four main areas we noticed were the testers. So when we get done something, we have to pass it to the testers. It's in a queue till they test it and get it back to us. We're in a queue waiting for that testing. When that testing comes back and it says this is wrong and that's wrong and this is wrong, we now can work on it again, but we've been blocked during that period. So the testers were one cause of the queuing. And it wasn't the testers themselves, it was the process of how testing gets done in this particular organization. Another was the database experts. Another was the product owners who could answer most of the important questions. The testing and the database usually had to do with things that we needed to get done once we were discovering what needed to get done. But the product owner or the user, we were the ones we could ask questions about, well, what is this supposed to do and how's it supposed to work? In a lot of organizations, they try to document, here, you're going to work on this story today. Here's everything you need to know. It's in this document. We still have questions for that person. And the last one was the people who would either deploy our work or set up our environments. They were all in different departments or different teams in different parts of the company. We would have to go to them to get these answers. And that started telling us they're really inherently going to have to be part of the team. So with mob programming, if we can introduce, and I used to call mob programming before, now I'm calling it software teaming, but originally I wanted to call it whole team programming, because by the time we discovered this, we needed more of a team than just a few developers. The first thing we did was we added a tester, and then we couldn't completely add a product owner, so we started enticing them to spend more and more time with us. Because I think they could see if they didn't answer our questions, their work took longer to get done. And we started giving reasons for the database people to work more closely with us and the deployment people. But the way I saw it, the team needs to be responsible for that, not these individuals or these different roles. It's the skills the team itself needs to have. So this is how mob programming dealt with this. We started getting this cycle time of next to nothing.
Right.
Like we could do something that used to take a week or two because of all the waiting. Now it's taking an hour or two. We could pick something up to work on it, get it deployed because it was fully tested. It was exactly what the product owner or users wanted. It had the database changes that need to be done, again, fully tested, and we could deploy it ourselves. So that's where it condenses down that cycle time, and cycle time is how we measure from start to finish.
Right.
That we've started on something and we've deployed it or delivered into real use.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It makes so much sense because you're reducing you're reducing inventory by making the cycle time less. Then mob programming helps with, while you're in a cycle, it helps with the speed because you're doing way less context switching.
That's right.
Because when you're normally doing it in a standard way, you have to go from, hey, you work in your little corner and you have to go to another, and you have an issue, you go to the guy, it's like, hey, can you help me out? Now you're taking up their time and then they have to context switch, and it's not going to be that easy. It's really hard to get engrossed, and then they'll be able to maybe help you. But while you're doing mob programming, they're there, they have the knowledge, and they can just they before you even ask the question, they already know.
That's right. So there's something important there that you touched on. And that is that while we're waiting, while we're in a queue, the way we normally deal with being in a queue is we take on another piece of work to work on while we're waiting for the other thing to get completed. So in other words, if we thought, okay, this needs to be tested, we hand it to the testers, then what do we do? Just sit there? What normally happens is we take on another piece of work, which essentially is we've introduced inventory. So now we are context switching between the two. We are multitasking because our brain isn't going to set down the other thing until we're done with it. So this is the way humans, I think, as far as I can see, work. So we take on that other thing, we work on it, then the thing comes back from testing, it's the more important thing, so we go back to working on it. We're multitasking, we're context switching, we're having distractions and disruptions. There's a lot going on here that's really wasteful, but we don't see it as waste. It's not apparent. We're not aware of it. And so I think that a lot of software development takes weeks and months that could take hours or days, and because of these problems. Now, you had brought something else up besides inventory, and I think I skipped past that.
So the other part was the culture. Like it seems like mob programming, because you are always looking at different companies and trying to help them out. You think last time you said you've been to somewhere like in the hundreds.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
What does mob programming do to make a better work culture?
Oh, that's a cool way to think about it. So, first of all, we already kind of covered this idea that all of the work we do requires collaboration. It requires collaboration in some form, and it usually takes a form of communication events. We send an email, we get a response, we send a message, we make a phone call, we talk with somebody, we have a meeting. We're not working on the work when we do that. We are talking about some aspect of the work. But still, it's a kind of collaboration. But I think it's a very weak kind of collaboration. So what I find in most organizations is we have all kinds of processes in place to make the coordination of those communications work for us. So there's a lot that we need to do that goes beyond a document. So if somebody gives me a document and I've got let's just say 12 pages of a document, I've got to read that thing. On the other end, somebody had to have written that thing. The writing usually takes a lot longer than the reading. And so we've spent quite a bit of time already. But as I read the document, I will start writing down the things I don't understand. Now, what will often happen, people will say, okay, our documents aren't clear enough, so we're going to use this form. And this form, it tells you all the different things you need to do to communicate about a feature that we're going to have, or a part of a feature. So we come up with different ways to make the coordinating of these communications easier. And what it does is it just makes them more laborious, or they makes them more work. And we don't get a clarification of the understanding. In fact, I worked on a project. I love this example. I worked on a project once where we got a requirement, and they were all very strictly documented into these forms. And we worked on one and kind of got it done. And then we picked up the next one. And what we found was, it wasn't really the next one, it was several times later, everything looked kind of familiar. And then we realized that only a few things had changed from the one we'd worked on before. The title had changed, the purpose for what it was had changed, but a lot of the stuff inside didn't change. And we looked it over and said, well, what happened here? And we were able to get in touch with the person who created that document. And they looked over and said, I didn't make the changes I need to make. Now, I can tell you why that probably happened. It's because they were under a deadline that they had to have stuff done, and they were rushing through their things and didn't realize they'd finished that one. So they had copied and pasted the first document, or made a copy of it, and then they started making the changes they needed, got distracted. So communication by documentation can have a lot of these kinds of problems. And the reason is there's no way to, one of the issues with this is that there's no way to prove that we got that document correct. The way that we often do that is we hand it off to someone who will review it for us. The person reviewing it for us is going to quickly go through and make sure all the form is completely filled out, but they might not read everything, but they might still sign it off that they did read it, because it's too much work. We've introduced tons and tons of work, and this is what we used to call those heavyweight processes that Agile was attempting to address. So instead of doing all those documents, with a more Agile approach would be, we know the thing we want. We want this report that has this purpose, and the data will come from this knowledge area. We don't need to determine the tables or all of that stuff, or exactly what's going to be in that report, till the moment we get ready to start working on it. Then we can get together with the product owner, the people who are going to write the code, the testers, and everybody, and just sit there and start working on it. Oh, what does that report look like? Oh, you got an example here. We look at the example. How do we get that? Well, here's the query or whatever that would have gotten it. Or maybe we need to write that query. So the database person is there helping us think that through. Oh, we need a service for that. We're talking about how we're going to fulfill it and what it's going to be in real time. That compresses out all that before thought, which we cannot prove is correct, and then the actual work, and then the testing and everything that happens afterwards, instead of cycling back and forth through this stuff, which is what a lot of people do, is we've brought that under one roof, one time. Now, what does this mean about the culture of the place is what we want to get to here. And that's basically it. Because everything is collaboration, none of this work is done in isolation. I want to cover that first. When I first started writing software, I wrote software that I myself would use. So I knew what it needed to do. I knew how to test it. I knew how the data was going to get generated and how I would store it. And I was the one who was going to write the code. So all those conversations that in a company that we need to do between people and groups was all in one person's brain. So I didn't have any queuing. I could just sit down and go, okay, the next thing I need to do is I need to make it where I can send some of this stuff to a printer. Right now, it's just on the screen. So I need to send it to a printer. So I need to figure out, how do I print? In those days, it was a lot more work than it is nowadays. How to print the stuff, how to format it, and so on. So I knew what I needed. I could tell it was correct when I was done. So none of that queuing happened. So the queuing is, the collaboration is needed so that we can take the brains of 5 or 6 people and get all that into the one thing we're doing. So we need the collaboration, which we wouldn't need if it was just one person working on one thing that they themselves were going to use. This is kind of what mob programming brings to us. We have a multi-sized brain now. It's got 6 or 7 or 8 people. It doesn't matter how many. I've never worked with more than, I think, 14 working on one thing at the same time. It's physically in front of one computer.
Wow.
But anyways, whatever the number of people is, that represents the knowledge that we're going to have, that we need to have. This is really the way I think of it. If we can gather all the skills and knowledge together, and we work together in a really good collaborative manner, then we can work directly on things from start to finish, which reduces our cycle time, reduces our inventory, reduces the context switching that happens when I have to go interrupt somebody else or they have to come interrupt me. So this means we need a culture where collaboration is accepted and understood, that it's more important to have the work flowing well than it is to have everybody busy. In many organizations, the whole point of the way we're working is to make sure everybody is kept busy, so we're getting full value for their time. And that is, I would say, sort of a misplaced understanding of what it is we're trying to do. Being busy is easy to do. Yeah. And in so being busy, we aren't effective at all. So it's easy to be busy but not be effective. I'm more interested in being effective. And if we can be more effective and nobody's busy, that's worth considering. And that's part of the culture we need to have, is where we understand that keeping people busy isn't what gets stuff done. Keeping people focused on their own specialty creates silos. And when we're in a silo, we don't have as much understanding of what's going on around us or how the people are going to use the stuff we're doing for them. And that's an issue as well. So we have this silo of expertise, which is also a kind of a silo of ignorance. So outside of us, we're more ignorant of what's going on there. And the people outside, they don't have knowledge about what we're doing. When we're going to do something for them, they come to us, they describe what we need. We have some meetings about it. They leave, and then we do the work. We've stopped collaborating. So we just wanted to increase the amount and type of collaboration where we're doing. So it requires a culture where we're open to this. And what would that culture be like? There are many kinds of teams that have been in existence probably since the beginning of humanity. And there are many, many different ways to work. And some of these, and they've been described, in documents, in books, in podcasts nowadays, and other ways for generations, for thousands, eons of time. If we have a tribe or we have a family group, these are types of teams. We could think of them that way. So we have to have a culture. So does it change the culture? That's going to depend on how the people are and what they currently do. A lot of people ask me, well, how do we convince somebody that they should work this way? And I don't think that's a good idea to do. And I certainly don't. I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to convince people they should be doing this. I'm trying to make people aware that this is an option. Because mob programming doesn't replace working alone or working in pairs and other forms of communication. It just enhances it or adds another dimension to it. So when we work as a mob programming team or a software teaming team, we would often split into smaller groups. Let's say there were 6 of us working that day, and we might find something where, the 3 of us will go work on one thing while the 3 others go work on something else. We might get it where one person goes off and works solo while another pairs and another's 3. Or we have 5 people working and one person's off working solo. It's going to depend on what the individuals decide what they feel is most effective at the moment. We wouldn't go very long working separate. That would be to tackle something that was pretty discreet, pretty direct, and then we would be back together so we could keep the communication. So I'm trying to say it this way nowadays. Rather than trying to get better at communication and coordination, let's get better at collaboration. And it takes care of the other problems. We have to understand that the team needs to be able to make most of the decisions. And that means we are no longer in the same hierarchy structure of who makes decisions in most organizations. If the team is not allowed to make the decisions, they have to have meetings with people higher up. They need to create the documents. They need to do it higher up in the hierarchy. They need to do the communications that need to get done so that person can get enough information to make a decision. If they can't make it, they have to go up a step in their hierarchy or move out to other groups. So we are introducing queuing, inventory when we do those things. If we bring all the skills and knowledge onto a single team, then but what is the culture needed for that? We need to have this culture of collaboration, of always getting better at being good at collaborating. I often would say to myself, today, you've got to work to be the best team player you can be. And we can think about this in sports and other things like music, like a band. If I'm playing on a sports team, and I've never done anything like that for a living, but, for fun, and I just want all the glory. So whenever the ball, let's say we're playing football, whenever the ball gets near to me, I start kicking it down the field, and then I want to get to the goal and make a goal. When there's plenty of other teammates nearby that I could pass the ball to, I'm trying to do it all myself. That team is going to not do very well. Matter of fact, the other team will catch on that one guy is a glory hog, and they're going to make sure they're getting in my way. And so I have to be good at passing the ball to someone else. And that's a big part of how this is. It's a team attitude about how we're going to work together. It's that none of us, not a single one of us individually, can accomplish all this when that knowledge is not all in one person's brain. So we need to get good at working with each other. Is that sort of what you wanted to cover? I'm not sure if I covered the right direction.
No, you did. That was a beautiful answer. No, please. No, don't. That was great. Thank you so much. I think this is something, I just think this is such an amazing idea because I really do believe in collaboration. And honestly, that's the main reason I was so interested in talking to you. Was because you're so adamant about mob programming. And I think something you said there was so important to me, which was you're not trying to impose it on everybody. Like you're saying, you're trying to say, you're just trying to add another dimension to a team. And I think that was such a great way of putting that. Honestly, thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much for being here and having this talk with me. I really, really appreciate it.
Sure. I'm really happy to help out any way I can. So if there's, if I can be of assistance, so if there's ever anything I can do, you just let me know. And I love talking about this stuff. I hope you can tell.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure as many people possible have a chance to know about it and consider it. I would never, like I said, force someone to work this way if I was the boss. And I think it needs to be voluntary. That's part of teamwork.
Yeah.
Part of teamwork is saying, we have this goal that aligns with our own personal goals. Our goal here is to create this wonderful software that somebody's going to use, and it aligns with my personal interests that maybe I'm really into. I'm a Java programmer or something. I really want to do this kind of code. It also aligns with the way I like to have my brain work and all those things. So we find ways. I want to maybe be sure I interject one last thing.
Of course.
I love coding alone. I love programming alone. So this, I'm not saying you got to stop programming alone. Often I try to program something every day. And that often means if I'm not doing a workshop, I have to do some coding on my own. And usually nowadays it's just exercises, something interesting new I want to learn, things like that. But I like that feeling of being alone, solving a problem. But in work, I feel that I'm much more effective when I'm working on a team and the communications are happening under a full collaboration mode. So I recognize the value of both of those to me. One of them is for my own personal interest. The other is for how do I get my personal interest to align with the goals of the team, what we're trying to accomplish. So yeah, I would
Wow.
never say, no, you shouldn't program alone. That's something we can have as well.